I'm Vic Myers. Welcome to the Resistance. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Hold on to that for a minute. Next month, next year, next decade, this regime and its fascist ways will come to an end. Then what? Will it be a gradual return to the previous status quo? Will we be content to just go back to the way things were before the era of Trump? That hasn't worked out well for us in the past. President Ford chose to pardon Nixon so that we could move forward and to avoid dividing the country. Maybe if Ford had put our national values, like justice for all, ahead of political expedience, we might have avoided our current predicament. Maybe. In his first term, Trump was impeached twice. In the first case, Republicans refused to convict because they said the impeachment was political. In the second case, they admitted his guilt, but said that the courts could hold him accountable for his January 6 crimes. Thanks to Joe Biden's desire to avoid further dividing the country, he was not focused on holding Trump and his co-conspirators accountable. He also placed politics before our national values. Maybe if Biden had treated Trump's crimes with the seriousness they deserved, the American voters wouldn't have let Trump win a primary, let alone the presidency again. But he didn't. And of course, it's really easy to blame Ford and Biden for not just allowing a low bar for presidential behavior, but for removing it altogether. But even with all that said, the bigger question is this. What about us? We were all sitting in the front row on January 6, 2021. Where is our accountability? That line I opened with, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's from the Declaration of Independence, our original No Kings document that kicked off the American Revolution. A revolution that eventually gave us our Constitution. 250 years ago, our founders were taking an incredible risk when they signed the Declaration and sent it to King George. When the Constitution was ratified, they were taking another chance. They gave us the power and the responsibility to use it and protect it. A power and responsibility that requires us to be participants in our freedom. We're failing to live up to the responsibilities our founders entrusted us with. Over the last 40 years, we've had a voter turnout average of around 60%. 4 out of 10 eligible voters choose to stay home on Election Day. And those 4 are far more likely to be struggling because wealthy Americans vote at twice the rate of the non-wealthy. This dynamic has helped create a re-election rate of around 90%. More incumbents leave office because of death than because of voters. What does this mean for a post-Trump era and what it'll look like? If we choose to fail to participate in our freedom, it could mean that Trump is simply replaced by somebody smarter, but just as evil. Or it could mean that Trump and his followers are swept into the dustbins of history and we'll be right back to where we were before Trump. Ripe for another fascist demagogue to try again. Or we refuse to give power back to those who made Trump possible. And we restore the American dream, the version that finally belongs to all of us. We do this by participating in our freedom, so that we once again have a government that derives its power from the consent of the governed. Thanks for listening. Good day.